The ship groaned against the gray Atlantic swell, its steel belly heavy with passengers who were neither immigrants nor tourists, but prisoners of war. They huddled on the deck, women in faded uniforms, their hair tied back, their eyes hollow with fatigue. They had left behind a defeated homeland where the ruins still smoked, where hunger prowled like a wolf at every door. Each carried the weight of an uncertain fate. Some expected ridicule, others cruelty, and many imagined chains and the cold silence of isolation. But as the American shoreline rose into view, Boston Harbor with its forest of cranes and shimmering skyline, they found themselves staring not at humiliation, but at something far stranger. At first, it was the sound that unsettled them, the whine of trucks below the piers, the horns of ships, the casual laughter that drifted from the docks. It was laughter that did not hide behind clenched teeth, laughter without fear of being overheard. They had grown used to whispers in Germany. When the gangway was lowered, the women descended cautiously, clutching what little they possessed. American guards stood waiting, but their posture was not that of conquerors brandishing rifles. Instead, some were distractedly smoking cigarettes, others joking with dock workers. The German women prepared themselves for the sting of insults, the slap of hands that might force them into lines. Yet instead, they saw something that rattled them more than hostility ever could. American women, confident and commanding, standing at the edge of the pier with clipboards. One woman wore trousers rolled at the cuffs, her sleeves pushed up as she shouted instructions to the men beside her. Another carried a stack of papers thicker than a Bible, and barked orders that even the guards obeyed. The German prisoners froze. In their world, uniforms meant authority, and authority belonged to men. But here were women, casual as if it were natural, telling soldiers where to march prisoners, directing traffic of crates and luggage, correcting clerks who fumbled paperwork. The guards herded them into trucks bound for inland camp. The journey carried them through towns where shop windows displayed more abundance than the German women had seen in years. Shelves of canned goods, bolts of fabric, shoes polished and new. But what made their eyes widen most was not the goods, but the customers. Women, young and old, stood at counters counting out dollars, their voices confident as they made purchases without a husband or father at their side. One prisoner murmured, "They're free to buy what they wish." Another shook her head, disbelieving. In Germany, ration cards have been stamped under the watchful gaze of officials, every loaf of bread a negotiation. Here commerce itself seemed casual and unguarded, and women moved within it as equals. The trucks rumbled past a schoolyard where children played, their laughter shrill and carefree. Outside the fence stood mothers, some holding infants, some chatting with neighbors, one even pulling a notebook from her handbag and scribbling something with brisk determination. As the convoy pushed deeper into the American landscape, the countryside opened like a painting. Fields dusted with early frost, barns painted red, telephone wires strung taut across the sky. To the German women, the sheer order of it felt uncanny, or it scarred their homeland into rubble and silence. Here, even the barns looked defiant, standing tall and unbroken. But again, it was the people who shook them most. Women on tractors guiding plows, women in kerchiefs lifting bales of hay, their hands calloused, their posture proud. In the camps, barbed wire fences waited. They reminded the prisoners that they were captives, not visitors. Yet even inside, the presence of American women remained impossible to ignore. Female guards checked rolls. Red Cross volunteers oversaw distribution of blankets, and camp secretaries typed reports with authority. Each encounter whispered a subversive message. Here, women spoke, decided, and led. At night, lying on cots beneath the drafty barracks roof, the German prisoners whispered their astonishment. Life in the American camps unfolded with a rhythm that at first felt alien. Every morning the German women awoke to the clang of bells and the distant hum of trucks beyond the wire. They expected harshness, but the rules were methodical, almost bureaucratic. Work details, meal times, inspections. Yet what unsettled them most was not the fences or the guards, but the glimpses of American life just beyond. The barbed wire was like a theater curtain, and through it they watched a performance that contradicted everything they had been told about what women should be. In Germany, ideology had carved womanhood into a narrow mold. Children, kitchen, church. Posters had promised honor and obedience, dignity and silence. A good German woman was a mother and a caretaker, little else. Yet here in America, the war had rewritten gender lines in ink so bold it could not be ignored. By 1944, 6 million American women worked in factories. They assembled airplanes, riveted steel, and filled the roles men had abandoned when they marched to Europe. Work details became the first arena of revelation. Many prisoners were sent to nearby farms to ease the labor shortage, and there they met American wives who ran entire households in their husband's absence. The sight was disarming. A 35-year-old German widow remembered standing in the cold fields, hoe in hand, while the farm's mistress directed both men and women with a tone that carried no apology. She corrected a guard on the weight of grain. She dismissed excuses with a flick of her wrist, and when a tractor broke down, she climbed into the machinery herself and repaired it with practiced ease. The prisoners watched her oil-stained hands and realized she was no exception. She was the rule in this place. Within the camp itself, Red Cross volunteers arrived with boxes of supplies, blankets, soap, even books. One young American woman with spectacles perched on her nose greeted the prisoners not as inferiors, but with the brisk courtesy of a librarian organizing her shelves. She handed out novels, some of them written by women, and her authority over the distribution was unchallenged. The lessons multiplied in subtle ways. A secretary in the commandant's office, her typewriter keys clacking like gunfire, interrupted an officer mid-sentence when he misstated a number. She did not flinch when he frowned, but simply repeated the corrected figure until he conceded. A nurse in the infirmary scolded a soldier for negligence, and he accepted her rebuke without anger. Even a guard's wife, visiting with a basket of food, spoke freely before her husband, debating politics while he listened in silence. To the German women, every such moment was a small earthquake, a shattering of assumptions they had thought immovable. Conversations among the prisoners became confessions of envy and doubt. One recalled her mother's words, "A woman's strength is patience." Yet here, strength seemed to mean something different. Action, decision, voice. Another admitted she had once prayed her daughters would be obedient wives. Now she wondered if obedience was truly a virtue at all. The barracks at night buzzed with whispered reflections, as if the women were trying to piece together a puzzle that had been hidden from them their entire lives. The American women, often unaware of the silent revolutions they sparked, continued their work without ceremony. Some brought music into the camp, jazz records spinning, voices crooning in smoky tones. A German nurse, tending to a sick companion, listened to Ella Fitzgerald's voice drifting from a guard's radio and thought it sounded like liberty itself, warm and unashamed. Another time, prisoners witnessed a town hall gathering from the back of a truck. Through the open windows, they heard women's voices arguing fiercely about ration distribution and school funding. No one silenced them. The German prisoners exchanged stunned glances. In their homeland, such public boldness from women would have been dismissed as hysterical or even punished. Humor surfaced, too, though edged with longing. One prisoner attempted to mimic the stride of an American woman she had seen on the street. Shoulders back, chin high, steps brisk and unapologetic. Her companions giggled at the performance, but the laughter quickly melted into a hush, as if acknowledging that what they mocked was what they secretly desired. Each day sharpened the conflict inside them. They were still prisoners, bound by wire and watched by guards. Yet outside the fence, American women moved as if the world itself were theirs to command. The German women could not escape the irony. In captivity, they were witnessing a freedom they had never tasted at home. And the more they witnessed it, the harder it became to dismiss it as an anomaly. Some wrote about it in their diaries, scribbling between censored lines. One entry read, "They are not afraid to speak. Even when men disagree, their voices are not silenced." Another confessed, "Perhaps our silence was never strength, but surrender." These words, fragile yet defiant, marked a transformation that could not be undone. The conflict became internal. Could they allow themselves to acknowledge decency without betraying their homeland? Could they admit that compassion was possible across enemy lines? Some chose silence, carrying their confusion in secret. Others dared to whisper small admissions, confessing that they had begun to see Americans not as faceless enemies, but as individuals. Humor, too, began to change flavor. Early laughter had been nervous, defensive. Now it softened. Women teased each other for acquiring cravings. One insisting she would dream forever of canned peaches, another swearing she could no longer live without butter. A few even joked, half seriously, that if the Americans continued feeding them so well, they might never want to leave. Beneath the laughter lay truth. The camp had ceased to be purely a place of fear. It had become, strangely, a place where survival felt possible, even humane. But the greatest transformation came in the subtle return of hope. Not for freedom yet, nor for reunion with families, but hope that the world beyond war might hold more humanity than they had been taught to believe. That hope was fragile, tentative, but it grew with each day of unexpected kindness. And yet beneath the admiration lay fear. They knew the war would end, that they would be returned to a Germany still ruled by ruins and old expectations. What would happen when they stepped back into a society that demanded their silence again? Could they forget what they had seen? The authority in an American woman's voice, the freedom in her stride. When the war ended, the camps began to empty. The German women, once so certain they would never see their homeland again, now faced repatriation. The trucks that had once brought them into captivity now carried them away back to where Europe scarred and fractured. Yet, as they prepared to cross the ocean once more, many realized that they were not returning as the same women who had left. The fences had held their bodies, but their minds had wandered beyond them, and what they carried back was less visible than scars, but far more enduring. The voyage across the Atlantic was heavy with memory. They leaned on the ship's railing, staring at the gray water. But their thoughts lingered on the fields where American women had driven tractors, the classrooms where young girls carried books, the town halls where mothers argued over policy. These images clung to them like contraband hidden in the folds of their clothing. One prisoner murmured that she feared the return more than she had feared capture, for captivity had given her glimpses of freedom that her homeland might never allow. Another confessed she would rather remain behind the American fences than step back into a life where her voice meant nothing. When they disembarked onto the ruins of Germany, the contrast was devastating. Streets still gaped with bomb craters. Buildings stood as skeletons of brick and steel. Food was scarce, and hope scarcer still. Men returned from the front, broken or not at all, and the old hierarchies rushed to reassert themselves. The women's families expected them to bow their heads again, to slip silently into kitchens and laundry rooms, to rebuild the nation with patience, but without complaint. Yet something in them resisted. They had seen another way, and the memory pulsed beneath every command to stay quiet. One woman, once timid, now argued openly with her father about how rations should be divided. Another, a nurse who had watched American counterparts take charge in hospitals, refused to defer to the village doctor when she knew his treatment was wrong. A widow, who had whispered in the barracks that obedience might not be strength, told her children stories of American women who worked machines and held money in their own hands. Her sons laughed, calling it fantasy, but her daughter listened in silence, her eyes shining with a dangerous curiosity. The transformation was not uniform, but it was undeniable.